In the upcoming episode of the Rich Giardino Show, I'm going to be talking to you personally from the heart about a situation, a medical condition that occurred over the summer that scared the heck out of me. Fortunately, it turned out as a life learning experience. I think you'll find it interesting, enlightening, and hopefully you'll take some of the lessons that I learned and be able to apply them in your life. So stay tuned and please listen, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.
Former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
From Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
Welcome to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. I'm your host, Rich Giardino. Today, we're going to talk about a personal issue that I had over the summer. I want to address it directly with you to give people an idea that this could happen to you at any time. For me, I was fortunate. In our country, millions of people a year are given chronic or acute diagnoses. Some of these are fatal diagnoses. Well, I'll tell you how mine started, and I'll tell you what happened, and my story has a good ending. Unfortunately, for too many people, it doesn't have a good ending. So what happened with me is I had a kidney stone in April and May, and I felt severe pain. I thought I had an obstruction, intestinal obstruction. I went to the ER after several days. They took some CAT scans or MRI. It really doesn't matter to the civilians. They did a scan. They took some blood tests. And the doctor came in and said, I got good news and bad news. The good news is it's not an obstruction. The bad news is you have a 4 by 8 millimeter kidney stone. I said, fine. I had kidney stone 20 years ago. They gave me an IV drip. In 2 hours, they released me. The pain was gone, and I thought I may have passed the stone or it moved. So for about a month, everything was fine. And then in the beginning of May, I had severe pain again. Had some more blood tests, had another scan, and the doctor said that the stone was still there. It had moved. My spleen was enlarged, and that all my blood tests were out of whack. So anyways, I end up having a second stone. I have a stent put in for a week. I have more scans and more blood tests, and everything is all out of whack. All my numbers for my liver, my spleen, everything else is way out of whack. So I ended up going to my regular doctor, and we're more of a friends than we are doctor-patient relationship. And I've always valued that he's been very direct with me. I'd rather have a doctor who's direct and tells me what's going on and what we're going to have to look at the options than having a doctor who minimizes and says, we need this or that. And it turns out to be worse than it is. So my philosophy is always, I'd rather have the bad news and believe that it's worse. And it turns out to be not as bad as we first thought. So I went to my routine doctor every 6-month appointment, and he told me point blank, I'm talking to you as a friend, not as a doctor. You should consider retiring and enjoying the rest of your life. And that was followed by big red flags on your blood tests and your CAT scans, that you have potential for liver disease, which hits hundreds of thousands of people a year in this country. And it's the 10th leading cause of death to Americans is liver disease. And that my liver disease may have progressed from a typical fatty liver 6 years ago to what could be non-alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver. So we had this heart-to-heart conversation, and I left the office. The first call I made was to a friend of mine who was a lawyer and a judge. And I said, my doctor just said I ought to think about retiring and enjoying the rest of my life, and that I have potential for severe liver issue related to non-alcoholic cirrhosis. He said, well, why did he tell you it that way? I said, I know I got to get a liver biopsy, But I said, that's no different than your doctor who tells you that with your blood pressure, if you have a spike in your blood pressure, you can have a massive heart attack and die before you hit the ground. We both had a chuckle because we said our doctors must have gone to the same medical school and had the same course on telling people that they have end-stage diseases or potential problems. Now, I started thinking to myself, is this real? And what hit me that made me believe that this is pretty serious stuff is a month before, a friend of mine offered me a deal to purchase my house. And I haven't had anyone offer to seriously buy my house. And I wondered about that. And I'd also ordered a dumpster on my own to clean out stuff that's been sitting for 25 years in the house. So I said, well, why would somebody offer to buy my house? And why would I get a dumpster if this wasn't some sort of sign from God that the doctor's assessment is accurate? So the doctor set a date for a biopsy of my liver and ordered more tests. I thought, my first thoughts were, well, who do I tell? How many people do I tell? And I said, at this stage, it's just a red flag, big red flags. It's not a final diagnosis. So I didn't want to tell too many people because I didn't want to have a scare that turned out to be just that, a scare, and not an actual diagnosis. So for me, what was interesting is I said, I want to spend some of my money I've got saved. I started buying lunches and dinners for people, which is a big red flag for them. One of my friends said, something's up because you never treat, knowing how cheap I am. So he was actually, part of that was I wanted to buy for people, not knowing if I'd see them in a year or two. So the next day I called the doctor back. I said, did I really hear you right? What does that mean? Well, that means you got a serious liver problem. And if it comes out, the biopsy isn't good, it could be a matter of a couple of years. And if it's not so bad, you could live a normal life and with just some adjustments in your diet and healthcare. So it really wasn't a final determination. It was just a red flag, and I appreciated the honesty. So the first thing I did was I called a fellow I know in insurance business, and I said, I need to know about long-term health facility insurance. Now, this is something I want you to think about because we wait until it's too long to think about it. I found out that if you have certain pre-existing medical conditions, you don't qualify for long-term health facility care insurance. But I also found out something interesting. You can get a policy that's like a term policy or life insurance that would pay for your long-term health care. But if you end up not needing it, your beneficiaries would get the money that you save plus the interest. So first lesson I teach you is if you can, look into long-term health insurance. It's not expensive. And it's almost a guarantee that if you don't go in, you can find a policy that would help your family or spouse or significant other to have the proceeds from that policy if it's not needed. That was number one. Number two, I'm a surrogate. I was a surrogate judge for 20 years. I dealt with estates and trusts, and I dealt with people who died with and without wills, and people objecting or contesting the wills. And if there was no will when you die, the state decides by a formula who gets it based on children, spouses, grandchildren. And so I confess that many lawyers like myself know, and we deal with giving people wills, but some of us, many of us, don't have a will ourselves. So I called a lawyer friend of mine and set up an appointment to make a will. I then took the avenue that I wanted to take my deed, which is another thing you can do. And you can take the deed and make it a life tenancy where you live in your house for life. And upon your death, it goes to your designated individuals. Most people do this as an estate planning tool for Medicaid, so that if you do go into a nursing home, if it's in the trust or if it's in a situation set up where you're a life tenant, then if it's been done 5 years before you get ill or before you go in a nursing home, the government can't take those proceeds. It can't force you to sell your house. So that's another thing you should discuss with a qualified lawyer who deals with this type of thing. The other thing I started to think about was, I'm a country fan. I all of a sudden started thinking of Live Like You Were Dying song, 5 More Minutes, One More Day, a lot of those old country songs. And I said, now my mindset has gone to the dark side. I didn't want to be depressed and sit home and say, I'm not going to make this. But I do think that one of the things that was as an aside that I thought was a little humorous for me is I thought about doing a life celebration while I'm still alive and not waiting to have a celebration of somebody's life after they're passed. And I said to one of my close friends, I said, well, if I do a life celebration, I said, people will say nice things while I'm still alive. And they said, don't bet on it. They hear nice things about you. I said, well, if I pay for the booze and I pay for the food, people will say anything for free food and free drink. So I thought that was a healthy option. But anyways, back to the things you need to do and the things I started doing. I called the funeral director that I'm friends with, and I said, talk to me about the plans for prepaying my funeral. That's something you should think about. You can get life insurance policies. You can get policies that would pay your funeral expenses ahead of time so your family doesn't have to worry about it. You can even get down to picking what kind of casket you want. Another thing I never thought of before, do I want to be cremated or do I want to be buried traditionally? Those are things you can think of. And I got to the point where I had to check and see the funeral family plot, how many spaces we had left and how that works. At our particular cemetery, through the church, if you're cremated, you can be placed already in one site that's already been designated. If not, and you have a traditional casket, you'd be placed there. But if there's more people than sites, then you have some decisions to make ahead of time. Now, another thing that's very important is a power of attorney to take care of your financial needs and things of that nature. I feel like I'm one of midnight advertisement for lawyers, but it's not. Is to get you ready so that you have more say in what happens to your finances, more say in what happens to you as a person in your body and your health care. So one of the things that you should consider is the difference between a healthcare proxy and a living will. A healthcare proxy is someone you designate to make medical decisions for you when you can no longer make those decisions. The other option is what we call a living will, where you get to say, I want this. I don't want to, I want a DNR, do not resuscitate. I do want this treatment. I only want life support for a certain amount of days. I want comfort care. I don't want extreme measures taken. So a living will is giving you the opportunity, and some states call them other things like living health care proxies, but a proxy usually means another person making the decision. So a living will gives you the opportunity to decide how you want to be treated in your end of lifetimes. A healthcare proxy gives somebody else decisions based on their conversations with you on when to pull the plug, other things like that. And it sounds cruel and harsh, but those decisions have to be made or will be made at some point generally. So those are important that you know about. The other thing that I started thinking about was, who do I want to tell? How do I want to tell them? And what things in the house, like who do I want to have my guns, my nephew? Who do I want to have antiques that I have, So this gives you an opportunity to start thinking about these things now, what you can do in the future or what you can do in the near future. I, for one, as a surrogate, was embarrassed that I didn't already have a will, and I was embarrassed that I didn't have trusts and other things set up. A trust, again, is a device for passing property where the government can't get to it, and you can designate who does. There's revocable and irrevocable trusts. Again, these are things you need to discuss with a lawyer. So you can start exploring it in your mind. You start going through, do I want to change this? Maybe it's time to start going, working out and getting healthy. Well, it's a little too late for that when you're 65. Another thing that's very important that I think you should think about is donor. Do you want to donate your organs, your eyes? Do you want to donate what parts you can healthily donate to somebody else to give them the gift of life? And you can make a difference in somebody else's life by donating your organs upon your death. But again, those are things you have to make the decision. And if you make them when you're alive, it's much better than if you wait. So the checklist I talked about, get to a lawyer who's got a reputation for doing a good job with wills, trusts, estates, healthcare, proxy. Again, it's confusing to a lot of people. That's for somebody else to make your decisions, like your children or your spouse or a trusted friend, or your living will, which you make your own decisions. And those are so important. So back to what happened with me. I started going through this. I started thinking to myself, I've wronged a few people in life that I wanted to reach out to and make good on. It's kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous for somebody who thinks they're dying. Alcoholic Anonymous, one of the tenets is to make right some of the wrongs that you did and to clear up some of the miscommunications. And I found that there were several relationships along the way, friends, family that might have gone astray, and that it was time to take a deep look and say, do I want to leave with the marks on the slate, or do I want a clean slate when I go? So that's another thing that I never thought about before. There's some, and I thought about including some people in the will and donating some of my insurance proceeds to, and some of my money from my savings in the sale of my house, that I thought that, to make up for our disputes in the past that caused rifts that really are insignificant when you're not going to be in this world much longer. So the results from the biopsy were in, and we were having a Zoom conference. I had previously invited the secretary to my celebration of life before I die and told her I was planning on end-of-life situations. The doctor calls me up and sends me by email the biopsy results. And the first thing he says to me is, my secretary said you were planning an end-of-life celebration and a wake. You've got plenty of time, so you might as well forget about that for now. You got a long life ahead of you. The biopsy results were negative for cirrhosis, not alcoholic. So that was the good news. So I was happy that he was honest with me in the beginning because, again, my philosophy is expect the worst, pray for the best, and be happy when it is better than the worst. As a result, the other important thing for me was an obituary and a eulogy. So for me, the obituary, who better to write an obituary? For those of you who know me, I love myself more than anyone else loves me, so I would do the best job at doing my own obituary. But I could highlight what I thought was important in my life and thank the people that I should thank. And so I had previously prepared an obituary, which is weird because I had an obituary before I did a will, but I kicked it up a notch or two to be ready if the day came sooner rather than later. So doing your own obituary ahead of time, you know what you've accomplished, you know what's important to you, your greatest accomplishments, whether it's your children, your spouse, whether it's your job, whatever. I also did a lot of reading, and one of the things I read about was Bronnie Ware. Bronnie Ware was a British hospice nurse, and she talks about the top 5 things that people say on their deathbed. Most people say they wish they had the courage to live the life they want to live. That's a lesson you should take from this. Live the life you want to live. You want to live, not what you think other people expect of you. And she said, nobody said, I wish I worked more. Everybody says, I wish I had taken more time off from work or worked less and spent more time going to my kids' games, doing things with my significant other, my spouse, whatever. Wish that they'd stayed in touch with their friends from high school, from college, from graduate school, their friends from growing up. A lot of the regrets were that they missed a lot of time that they should have spent with friends. And in fact, this summer I went to a few parties and I stayed for 3 or 4 hours, which is out of character for me because I've always got 4 or 5 events in a day on a weekend. But take time and spend time with the people you love and the people that are your friends and enjoy that time. Finally, Ronnie says most people say they wish they had let themselves be happier, whatever that means for them, but wishes they had been happier, done things that made them happy. So that's another life lesson from this. So to wrap this up, my results were good, but many people's aren't as good as my results were. Many people aren't as fortunate as I was, but this was surely a wake-up call. And so I tell you, start getting your affairs in order. Hope that you don't have to use them for 10 or 20 or 30 years, but have them lined up so that it makes it easier on the people around you, and it gives you a peace of mind as you approach the transition from life to the next life, if you believe in a Lord and a heaven. So I hope that you found this interesting, and I hope that you understand the context in which I offer this for you. I want you to have the benefit of what I lived through without having to live through it, without having to go through a month of thinking that things weren't going to be so good for you. You know, do tell people you care about them and you love them when you can. They might look at you weird. Buy a few dinners for other people. I know it's out of character for me, and it was one of the tells that something wasn't normal. So now I can go back to not buying dinners for everybody. But I really think it's an important lesson that I learned, and I want you to learn from my experience as well. So I hope you enjoyed this personal conversation we had today. I ask you to like, share, and subscribe to the Rich Giardino Show. Particularly share this with other people before they have to make life and death decisions in hours or weeks or days, when they have time to think about these things. And you can subscribe on YouTube, on X, on Spotify, on Apple, on Rumble, and other premium podcast platforms. This is Rich Giardino. I thank you for listening, and be safe. Thank a law enforcement officer, a corrections officer, a dispatcher, an EMT, or a firefighter for what they do every day to help us get through in these perilous times. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Like and subscribe to The Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on The Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.